The military judge looked down at Commander Sarah Mitchell with undisguised contempt. "You're not special," he sneered, his voice echoing through the sterile courtroom. "You're just another woman who couldn't handle the pressure." Sarah leaned forward to the microphone, her voice barely above a whisper as she spoke two words that would change everything. Shadow Phoenix. The moment those words left her lips, the atmosphere in the room shifted like electricity before a storm. Because some call signs carry the power to end careers, and Sarah Mitchell was about to remind everyone exactly who she really was. Welcome to Hidden Story, where we uncover the extraordinary lives hiding in plain sight. Before we dive into this powerful story of hidden authority and whispered justice, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because we read and respond to every single one. And if you believe stories like these deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us ensure they're never forgotten. The military tribunal courtroom at Joint Base Andrews carried the weight of institutional authority in every polished surface and precisely placed flag. Commander Sarah Mitchell, 42, sat at the defendant's table in her dress blues, the ribbons across her chest, telling a story of service that few in the room could fully comprehend. Her posture was perfect, her expression neutral, but those who knew how to read military bearing could detect something beneath the surface, not fear, but the coiled patience of someone who had survived things that would break lesser people. Judge Advocate General Colonel Robert Blake presided from the bench, his silver hair and stern expression marking him as a man who had spent decades in military legal proceedings. At 58, Blake had built his reputation on swift, decisive judgments and an unwavering belief in military discipline. To his right sat the prosecution team, led by Major Patricia Chen, whose perfectly organized files and confident demeanor suggested this was a case she expected to win easily. The charges against Commander Mitchell were serious: insubordination, failure to follow direct orders, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The incident in question had occurred 3 months earlier during Operation Desert Shield, when Mitchell had refused a direct order from her commanding officer during what was described in the official report as a time-sensitive reconnaissance mission. "Commander Mitchell," Colonel Blake began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, "you stand accused of directly disobeying lawful orders from your superior officer. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Sarah replied, her voice steady and clear. Blake's expression suggested he found this plea both predictable and tedious. In his experience, military personnel who found themselves in this courtroom typically fell into two categories: those who admitted their mistakes and those who compounded them with denial. He had already decided which category Commander Mitchell represented. Major Chen rose to present the prosecution's opening statement, her movements crisp and professional. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Commander Mitchell's actions endangered not only her own mission, but the lives of her team members. Her refusal to follow orders was not based on tactical considerations or operational necessity, but on what she has characterized as moral concerns, a luxury that cannot be afforded in military operations." Sarah's defense counsel, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, had requested access to Mitchell's complete service record, but his requests had been repeatedly denied on grounds of operational security. This left him defending a client whose full background remained largely classified, even from him. The prosecution methodically built their case over the first day of proceedings. Radio transmissions played through the courtroom speakers painted a picture of a commander who had simply refused to follow orders despite repeated directives from her superior. "Echo 7, you are ordered to proceed to Checkpoint Alpha immediately," came the voice of Colonel James Morrison, Mitchell's commanding officer, through the static-filled recording. "Sir, I'm reading civilian presence in the target area. Request permission to abort," Mitchell's voice responded, calm despite the obvious tension of the situation. "Echo 7, that is a negative. You will proceed as ordered. This is a direct command." "Sir, with respect, I cannot comply. Proceeding would violate rules of engagement regarding civilian casualties." The recording continued for several more exchanges, with Morrison's voice growing increasingly harsh and Mitchell maintaining her refusal. To the uninitiated, it sounded like simple insubordination. Major Chen was counting on the court to hear it that way. "Your Honor," Chen continued after the recording ended, "Commander Mitchell had clear orders. Her personal interpretation of the rules of engagement does not supersede direct commands from her superior officer. Military discipline requires following orders, not debating them in the field." Blake nodded approvingly. This was exactly the kind of clear-cut case he preferred. No ambiguous circumstances, no complex tactical considerations, just a simple matter of discipline and chain of command. Sarah watched the proceedings with the same neutral expression she had maintained throughout. Her defense counsel made the appropriate objections and arguments, but both she and Webb knew they were fighting an uphill battle without access to the classified aspects of her record. What neither the prosecution nor the judge knew was that Commander Mitchell's last 8 years of service were listed in Pentagon databases under a designation that existed in fewer than a dozen files worldwide: Shadow Phoenix Operations. Those who did know the designation understood it represented something that officially didn't exist. On the second day, Colonel Morrison took the stand to testify about the incident. A career officer with 25 years of service, Morrison presented himself as a competent commander, dealing with an insubordinate subordinate. "Commander Mitchell had clear orders," Morrison testified, his voice carrying the frustration of the incident. "The mission parameters were established at the highest levels. Her refusal to comply endangered not only the operation, but potentially other units operating in the area." Under cross-examination, Webb pressed Morrison on the details of the intelligence regarding civilian presence, but Morrison's answers remained vague. "Intelligence assessments are always estimates, Colonel Webb. Commanders must make decisions based on orders, not speculation about potential complications." Blake interrupted when Webb attempted to question Morrison about Mitchell's previous missions. "Commander Mitchell's service record beyond this incident is not relevant to these proceedings. The court will focus on the specific charges at hand." Sarah's expression flickered almost imperceptibly. She was beginning to understand the shape of what was happening. Not just a court-martial, but a deliberate containment of information that might provide context for her actions. The prosecution's final witness was Dr. Amanda Foster, a military psychologist who had been asked to evaluate Mitchell's fitness for command. Dr. Foster had never actually met Mitchell, basing her assessment entirely on the incident reports and personnel files available to her. "Based on my review," Dr. Foster testified, "I believe Commander Mitchell may be suffering from decision fatigue compounded by an inability to adapt to high-stress command situations. Her refusal to follow orders suggests a breakdown in the psychological framework necessary for effective military leadership." Webb objected strenuously to testimony from someone who had never examined his client, but Blake overruled him. "The witness is qualified to offer professional opinions based on documented behavior patterns." As Dr. Foster concluded her testimony, Sarah noticed something that made her straighten slightly in her chair. On Blake's desk, partially obscured by other papers, was a file folder with a classification marking she recognized, one that shouldn't have been in this courtroom at all. "The defense calls Commander Sarah Mitchell to the stand," Webb announced, though both he and Sarah knew this was a calculated risk. Without access to her classified record, he couldn't provide the full context for her actions, leaving her testimony potentially incomplete and vulnerable to prosecution attacks. Sarah moved to the witness stand with the fluid precision that marked her every movement. After taking the oath, she settled into the chair and met Blake's gaze directly. For the first time since the proceedings began, something shifted in the room's dynamic. Major Chen began her cross-examination immediately, clearly confident in her ability to dismantle Mitchell's defense. "Commander Mitchell, would you describe yourself as someone who follows orders?" "I follow lawful orders, Major," Sarah replied evenly. "And who determines whether an order is lawful? You. The Uniform Code of Military Justice provides clear guidelines for lawful orders, as does the Geneva Convention regarding civilian casualties." Chen pressed harder. "But in the heat of combat, When split-second decisions must be made, you believe you're qualified to override your commanding officer's judgment? I believe I'm qualified to prevent unnecessary civilian casualties when I have direct intelligence suggesting their presence. Blake leaned forward, his patience clearly wearing thin. Commander Mitchell, let me be very clear. Your job is to follow orders, not to play armchair strategist. The military cannot function if every officer decides to debate commands based on their personal interpretation of regulations. Sarah met his gaze steadily. With respect, Your Honor, preventing civilian casualties is not a personal interpretation. It's a fundamental principle of military ethics. Ethics? Blake's voice carried a note of derision. Commander, you've been in the military long enough to understand that sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good. Your refusal to follow orders suggests you lack the fortitude necessary for command positions. The courtroom was silent, tension building as Blake continued his unprecedented lecture from the bench. This court has seen nothing to suggest you are anything special, Commander. You're not exceptional. You're just another officer who couldn't handle the pressure and tried to hide behind moral posturing. Sarah's expression remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. She glanced again at the classified file on Blake's desk, then back to his face. For the first time since the proceedings began, she smiled slightly. Your Honor, she said quietly, may I clarify something for the record? Blake waved dismissively. Commander, you've said quite enough. I don't think I have, Sarah replied, leaning forward toward the microphone. Her voice dropped to just above a whisper, but in the silent courtroom, every word carried clearly. Shadow Phoenix. The reaction was immediate and electric. In the gallery, a Navy captain dropped his pen, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. Admiral Patricia Hendricks, who had been observing quietly from the back row, stood so abruptly her chair scraped against the floor. Two civilians in dark suits near the door began speaking urgently into their phones. Blake stared at Mitchell, confusion replacing condescension as he processed the words. What did you say? Sarah repeated it, her voice stronger this time. Shadow Phoenix, November 2019 through September 2023, Task Force Omega. The courtroom erupted in controlled chaos. Officers were pulling out secure phones, speaking in coded phrases that suggested something significant was happening. Blake banged his gavel repeatedly, demanding order in a courtroom that was rapidly slipping beyond his control. This court will have order, he insisted, raising his voice above the commotion. He was interrupted by Admiral Hendricks, who approached the bench with purposeful strides. She leaned close to Blake and spoke quietly, handing him a secure phone. Blake's expression transformed in real time as he listened to whoever was on the other end, confusion giving way to shock, then to something approaching fear. This court will recess for 1 hour, he announced, his voice unsteady. All present will remain in the building. As Blake hastily exited through his chamber door, the courtroom dissolved into tense conversations and urgent phone calls. Sarah remained seated at the witness stand, her expression calm despite the chaos around her. Admiral Hendricks approached her directly, ignoring protocol entirely. Instead of anger or surprise, there was something like recognition in her eyes. Commander, she said quietly, it's been a long time. 3 years, 4 months, Admiral, Sarah replied evenly. We thought you were KIA after the Kandahar incident. Some days I was, Sarah answered simply. Lieutenant Colonel Webb appeared at her side, bewilderment evident in his expression. Commander, what just happened? What is Shadow Phoenix? Sarah looked at him for a moment, considering how much she could reveal. Task Force Omega was a joint operations unit that handled missions requiring complete deniability, Colonel. For 4 years, officially, I was assigned to various training commands and staff positions. In reality, my team operated in places where American forces couldn't officially go. And Blake? Webb asked, watching the judge's empty chair. Colonel Blake was part of the legal oversight committee that authorized our operations, Sarah said, her voice hardening, including the one that got my entire team killed because he ignored intelligence warnings that proved accurate. The pieces began falling into place for Webb. He's been trying to discredit you. He's been trying to bury the past, Sarah corrected, but some ghosts don't stay dead. When court reconvened exactly 1 hour later, the transformation was complete. Blake was no longer present at the bench. In his place sat Admiral Margaret Thorne, Judge Advocate General of the Navy, whose presence sent shockwaves through everyone present. The gallery had been cleared of all but the highest-ranking observers and those with direct security clearances. New faces occupied the prosecution table. Major Chen had been replaced by a civilian attorney, flanked by military personnel whose insignia identified them as naval intelligence. The atmosphere had shifted from a routine court-martial to something approaching a national security briefing. "This tribunal is now in session," Admiral Thorne announced, her authoritative voice requiring no gavel to command attention. "In light of newly accessible classified information, this court-martial is hereby dissolved by direct order of the Secretary of Defense. All records of these proceedings are classified at the highest levels, effective immediately." She turned her attention directly to Sarah. "Commander Mitchell, please approach." Sarah moved forward with military precision, stopping precisely at the position of attention before the bench. Admiral Thorne descended from the bench and met her halfway, an unprecedented break with court protocol that signified something momentous. "Commander Mitchell," Admiral Thorne said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hushed courtroom, "on behalf of the United States Navy, I extend our deepest apologies for this miscarriage of justice. Your service record has been amended to accurately reflect your actions during Operation Desert Shield, which are now recognized as consistent with the highest traditions of naval service and sound tactical judgment." The revelation continued through carefully worded statements that confirmed Sarah's status without revealing operational details. Task Force Omega had been a special access program whose existence was known only to a select few. Sarah Mitchell hadn't been just another Navy commander. She had commanded one of the most classified units in American military history. Commander Mitchell's refusal to follow orders during Operation Desert Shield, Admiral Thorne explained, was based on her recognition of intelligence patterns that matched previous operations with catastrophic outcomes. Her decision prevented civilian casualties and potential diplomatic incidents that could have compromised ongoing operations in the region. Sarah remained at attention, her expression neutral despite the vindication unfolding around her. Only those who knew how to read military bearing might have detected the slight relaxation of her shoulders as years of carried burden began to lift. Admiral Thorne continued, "Additionally, this court has received evidence that the previous presiding judge had undisclosed conflicts of interest in this case, having been involved in decisions that directly affected Commander Mitchell's previous classified assignments." As the proceedings concluded, Admiral Thorne addressed Sarah once more. "You are hereby restored to full active duty status, Commander. Report to my office at 0800 tomorrow for new assignment briefing." After the courtroom cleared, Sarah stood alone for a moment in the empty space where her career had nearly ended. Lieutenant Colonel Webb approached, still processing what he had witnessed. "Commander," he said quietly, "I defended you without knowing who you really were." "You defended the right principle, Colonel," Sarah replied. "Sometimes that's more important than knowing all the details." Through the courtroom windows, they could see Colonel Blake being escorted to a waiting vehicle by 2 military police officers, his career and reputation destroyed by the truth he had tried to suppress. The file that had been on his desk, the one Sarah had recognized, contained evidence of Shadow Phoenix operations he had authorized despite intelligence warnings, decisions that had led to the deaths of her team. "Will you continue serving?" Webb asked. Sarah's gaze remained fixed on Blake's departing vehicle. "That depends on what Admiral Thorne has planned tomorrow. Some missions require people who've learned to operate in the shadows." The next morning, Sarah reported to Admiral Thorne's office at the Pentagon. The Admiral's first words were direct. "We need Shadow Phoenix operational again, Commander. There are threats that conventional forces can't address, and after yesterday's demonstration, it's clear you're ready to return to that world." Sarah considered the offer. "What kind of oversight?" "Direct accountability to me, and through me to the Secretary of Defense. No committees, no legal review boards with hidden agendas. Just clear mission parameters and the authority to execute them according to sound tactical judgment. For the first time since the court-martial began, Sarah allowed herself a genuine smile. "When do we start?" "You already have," Thorne replied, handing her a sealed folder. "Your first mission briefing is inside. Welcome back, Shadow Phoenix." As Sarah left the Pentagon with her new orders, she reflected on the journey from the courtroom to vindication. Sometimes justice came through legal proceedings, and sometimes it came through the simple act of speaking two words that reminded everyone who held the real power. The Phoenix had risen from the ashes of a corrupt system, and Sarah Mitchell was ready to serve again, this time with the full backing of those who understood what Shadow Phoenix really meant. In courtrooms and command centers across the military establishment, the lesson was clear. Some officers carry call signs that represent more than rank or assignment. They represent capabilities that, when properly recognized and supported, can accomplish missions that others cannot even imagine. The shadows were calling, and Shadow Phoenix was ready to answer. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with others. Help us ensure these tales of hidden authority and whispered justice reach the people who need to hear them. Thank you for watching Hidden Story. We'll see you in the next story, where another lesson waits to be learned, another truth waits to be revealed, and another reminder awaits that sometimes the most powerful words are the ones spoken in whispers.